The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to a discussion with Les Standiford. I'm Eileen Cavanaugh from the Hennepin County Library Program Office, and my guest today is the author of Raw Deal, a mystery set against the background of the Cuban emigre community in Florida. Welcome, Les.
Thank you.
Glad to have you with us today.
It's nice to be here. Nice to be here.
I'd like you to tell us, to begin with, just a little bit about your background, especially as it relates to the creation of John Deal, the main character in your story.
Well, John Deal is a building contractor in South Florida. He's an honest fellow, a moral dinosaur, I call him at some points, and he is somebody who came alive for me because of the background I had as a carpenter's helper when I was working my way through graduate school. I worked for a man, still a contractor out in Utah, who taught me a great deal about all I know about carpentry and a great deal besides about moral values. He was one of these people who believed in a day's pay for a day's work for a day's pay. Somebody who would never leave a job half finished, who would never give it any less than his very best. He was a very inspiring person to me, not only because of what he did, but the way he did it. Took great pride in his work and all that stuff. My friends in South Florida have told me that they're willing to accept some of the far-fetched plots that these books deal with, but the concept of a moral contractor, an honest contractor, they say, come on, Les, you're really stretching things here.
Especially
this is people
after
from
Hurricane Andrew.
That's right. That's right. But also, there's a little there's a world builders, a little world of contractors and what they, how they behave, their friends, what they like to do. As I say, the values that they have. I found it all very, very fascinating. Probably the last bastion of craftsmanship, and at least that I'm aware of in this country. I found it endlessly fascinating to take someone like that and use them as a kind of, him and his friends, as a kind of group, repertory that gets involved in Hitchcock-like plots. People just trying to get along and make a living, suddenly swept up in events that they really didn't know very much about until these things happen. And then they're, of course, forced to find out more about these things in the course of trying to save their own skins. That's essentially how the books work.
But beyond that, you have another background as a teacher of writing. Mm-hmm. Is it University of Florida?
No, it is, in a sense, the University of Florida. It's the branch of the University of Florida at Miami. It's called Florida International University. There was a move some years back to try to actually change it to truth in labeling, what it really is. But some of the branches down there have odd names. Florida Atlantic University, the University of South Florida, for instance, about 350 miles north of us. And these names have kind of stuck. The alumni actually protested. They said they graduated from Florida International University, and so it should stay. And the regents relented, and so we're still Florida International University, the public university in Miami.
So John Deal kind of comes out of your writing background and your construction background, and it's unusual. I think this is perhaps the first time I've seen an amateur detective be a construction worker.
Well, they tell me he's unusual. He operates as a kind of private eye without portfolio. It stretches your imagination, though, to consider how to keep a normal citizen involved in life or death situations, one after the other. When you've got a private eye or a cop or an ex-cop who's just trying to earn a little money or earn a living, it seems natural that they keep running afoul of bad guys because they're always poking their nose into funny business. But you see here I've got a fellow who, with a family, a wife, a child, friends, a normal, so to speak, life. And yet these calamities keep befalling him. We'll see how long I can keep it going.
This is similar in some ways to Aaron Elkin's mysteries. He has an ordinary person solving the mystery, but he also has the help of a former FBI man. In your case, you have the help of a former policeman.
Well, I had to bring somebody in for help, and we've got Vernon Driscoll, who's an ex-cop, an ex-Metro Dade detective, who's retires after the first in the series called Done Deal, now living in a fourplex that Deal has built himself. And so they function as sort of a buddy team in Raw Deal, and also in the successor to that. There'll be at least four of these books before it's all over. And that's what Vernon Driscoll's role is, to serve as that kind of liaison into the nefarious world that the Deal is not to.
Also solves the problem of how this person would get at certain kinds of information.
It's true. You have to consider these things. There's a mechanical aspect to it all.
Well, this Raw Deal is not a whodunit in the strict sense of the word, in that pretty early on we know whodunit. Is it more difficult to construct a novel and build in the suspense when you don't have that typical storyline that says, not until the last page am I going to know who did this?
Well, actually, I'm in awe of the writers who can construct that kind of puzzle and little by little by little peel the onion and leave you saying, oh my God, if I had just been smart enough to see that this way back on the first or the 10th page and it all, I can't do that. My mind doesn't work that way. That is so right brain, is that what it is? The creative and artistic side is the left and the right is the logical. If I've got that right. At any rate, one of the reasons why I'm in the arts and not in engineering, where I started off to be, is that my mind doesn't work in that kind of orderly fashion. And I think that's required to write the very best of these puzzle sort of mysteries. How did the murderer get in and get out of the room, still leaving the door locked from the inside, all that sort of thing? I don't know. I never know. I'm never able to figure that out.
I do admire the suspense that's created in Raw Deal when you really do know or have a pretty good idea who did this.
Well, hopefully that's it. There's a difference between mystery and suspense in my book, at least. And if there is any mystery in my books, it's in why the reader not being certain until later on why the bad guy, you may know who the bad guys are, but you don't necessarily know why they're doing this. And usually that's something that I like to withhold till the very last minute, till later, in the late stages of the game. And maybe that provides a little bit of mystery, but suspense. It's that old trick, you see the family in the station wagon setting out for a picnic in the first frame of a film, and in the second sequence you see a freight train somewhere. And you sense that, as you cut back and forth between this happy, joyous family and the freight train, that the two are going to intersect. And that's what I've done with these books.
And you have something of that in the marine life that Toreno has on his estate. I think they're lungfish.
Lungfish. Yeah.
And you hear these slurping lungfish, and you know something
hideous
terrible is going to happen.
Those lungfish are going to come back. Yeah. Do what they do best. Yeah.
I think, Les, we ought to back up a little bit and just set the framework of the story for us.
Well, at the writing of this book, Castro's days are numbered. We take the premise, and most people, at least in the West, would assume that's a reasonably good thing. But my book takes the tack. Well, maybe not. Maybe that's not such a wonderful thing, because maybe what's coming after him, maybe what's lurking in the wings, has the potential to be even worse. And specifically, Raw Deal tells the story of how John Deal, my building contractor, inadvertently stumbles into the path of a scheme to install this right-wing politician, a pretty brutal guy, a former Batista supporter, as it turns out, to a position of power once Castro falls. And this with the collusion of the U.S. government. That's the premise. And of course, Deal is a sort of fellow who's worked in South Florida for a number of years. He gets along with Hispanics of all sorts and Cubans. He has no brief either way. Being in the building trades, works side by side with them, and has no real feelings on these matters other than what you might expect, what anybody might have on certain issues. But once he realizes that someone's trying to kill him, he has to wise up in a real hurry, discovers who it is that's responsible for the travail that he's been put into, and in the course of trying to save his skin, and it's just the kind of story that I find myself drawn to a lot. I posit that an individual has the opportunity to really change the course of history. And all three of the books that I've published so far, I think, have that aspect to them, that were it not for the intervention of this person, momentous issues could have turned out quite differently. That's the real pleasure I have in working with this kind of story.
Both of your books, Raw Deal and Done Deal, do with the abuse of power by politically powerful people. Is this sort of your way of fictionally protesting?
Oh, sure. I'm a child of the 60s. I think that, and I don't say that with regret, I think that what happened in terms of political movements in the 60s changed the course of this country, because an awful lot of people just decided that they could do something about issues that they felt passionately about. And I've never lost that. Yet, I think that no one would deny, as the decades pass, we feel as a country and as a people less and less in control of our own destinies. We see the world changing so rapidly in terms of we hear so much about the information superhighway, and most of us feel we're just like hitchhikers, on the side of the road, being whisked past. And we sense a growing cynicism about politics and a failure, a sense that we're no longer as able to influence the direction of our country with our votes. And I like to counter that. I like to take someone like John Deal, who's not unmarked by all this. He likes to tell the story of George Washington, as representative of the way he viewed the presidency when he was younger. George Washington chops down the cherry tree, and then when his father comes out to see about it, he takes his hatchet out from behind his back and says, "I cannot tell a lie, Father. I did it. I'm responsible." But, says Deal, in recent years, I think about that story, and instead of George Washington, I see a little kid in a Richard Nixon mask. And when his father comes out to say what happens, he whips the axe out from behind his back and buries it in his old man's forehead. That's how the mood of the country has changed, says Deal. And yet, for all that, for all his realization of that, he cannot abide by it. Those old values that we were talking about earlier, this moral dinosaur says, when you make a mistake, you own up to it. You get paid on the basis of what you do, not on the basis of some scheme you figured out. When he finds out in one of these books that his wife may have lost her life because a fellow in a suit wants to make money off the national pastime, he goes ballistic and says something has to be done about this. And the tracings of such passion are what really interests me in writing these books. They're thrillers, and yes, things that happen are not your ordinary run-of-the-mill, everyday kinds of events. But what I try to do is take the givens or the conventions of the thriller or of the mystery or political thriller, and use that to examine things that really matter very much to me.
How much of this is true? For instance, a few weeks ago, as we speak now in October of '94, 60 Minutes ran a profile of Mascanosa. And as I read your book, it reminded me very much of Doreno, who is the main character, one of the main characters.
Imagine that. Obviously what I'm writing here is fiction. In fact, Jorge Mascanosa is referred to as other than the man in my book. But you can't help but can't help your imagination from running riot when you understand that there's a real-life foundation called the Cuban American National Foundation that's funneled about $200 million through its hands since its inception, reportedly at the behest of the National Security Council back in 1981. This has been reported in the New Republican Esquire and other places, fairly common knowledge. When you understand that that much money has run through the coffers of an agency not regulated by anyone, you begin to say, well, what if someone in such an organization were to have a criminal turn of mind? Or what if someone were unable to resist the temptation of having that much money rather free to spend? And what would, let's say that one of those people wanted to turn some of those funds to his or her own account. The other thing that got me thinking about this particular book was the fact that we all sense that Castro's days are coming to an end. I thought about all those generals in the Pentagon, all those key players in the military-industrial complex who were said to have gone kicking and screaming when the Cold War was proven to be a fiction. They did their darndest the last few years of the Cold War to maintain that myth that Russia was still a major threat, because they made a living off the Cold War. Once the Cold War was off, then we were going to see major downsizing in the military and industrial end of things, and also in the Pentagon itself. So I sort of combined those two ideas. What if someone who'd been making a living high off the hog by skimming money out of a foundation like the CANF were to see the handwriting on the wall and decided that he needed a way to ensure that once Castro fell, he was not left out of the equation, that there would still be work for Jorge or Vicente Luis Terreño. And that's what you have contributing to the plot of Raw Deal.
If Mascanosa read your book, what would he think of it?
Yeah, he would dismiss it. He's a very self-assured, very powerful person. I don't think he would like it very much. But we have the president of the Patriots Freedom Foundation in my book actually sending a letter of commendation to some of the principals at the end of this mystery, because in essence what they do, in name at any rate, helps the Patriots Freedom Foundation. It's not the Freedom Foundation nor its aims that the book would call into question, but rather somebody who's using that as a cover for criminal behavior.
Do you think there's a real danger that if and when Castro falls, we will just substitute a right-wing dictator?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that there's a real danger that could happen. I think that it's sad to say, but history is the proof of the pudding. That our interest always in destabilization of what we consider to be communist or leftist regimes, it follows that we try to install someone whose politics will ensure not the restitution of democracy in the country, but the installation of a person who's going to play ball, as it were, with us. And that's unfortunate.
It sounds like shades of Aristide being sort of schooled in Washington for 3 years before he was sent back.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why it took so long to put Aristide back there, because we weren't sure that Aristide was I think we kept, when I say we, I think there were certain people who kept hoping that someone else would come along that they could be more certain of to put in Aristide's place.
If Castro fell, or when he falls, do you think a significant number of Cuban exiles will return to Cuba?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think anyone who's any businessman who's now living in Florida and earning a good living from what it is that he's doing in this country would have the slightest intention of going back. And most emigres will admit to that. They've come to this country. They've made a new life. Their children are in school. Their businesses are flourishing where they are, and so while to go back is certainly a dream, and while most people feel great compassion for those people who actually were forced away, had everything taken away, and were forced into a foreign country to survive, most of them no longer would claim to want to go back the minute Castro falls. Some say yes, but by now it's become, I think, really a much more matter of principle than of practical repossession of the old family homestead.
How do you read Castro's allowing the rafters to free exodus from Cuba, something he hadn't done since the days of the Mariel boat lift?
Well, most analysts see it the same way they saw the Mariel boat lift. This was a way to pressure the government of the United States into making certain concessions. I think Castro had certain illusions that this would give him a card to play in easing the embargo on Cuba. And of course, the only reason why the rafters were not allowed in was that the Cuban American National Foundation applied great pressure upon the president to deny entry and remove this bargaining chip from Castro, because the CANF, the last thing they want is negotiations of any sort with Castro. Absolutely no dialogue, because they feel that this will lead to dialogue on Castro's terms, and they are adamantly opposed. What they want is the annihilation of the man and his government and the complete repatriation of the country on their terms.
It's amazing to me how smart some of these I feel as if America is sort of dumb by comparison, especially when you look at Saddam Hussein, who's forcing an issue with very little expenditure of time, money, anything on his part, and the same is true with Castro. It's not costing him very much to force issues with us.
Well, when you've put yourself in the position of being the world's morality cop, it's pretty easy for bullies of one sort and another to manipulate you. It's a darn shame. That's the price we pay.
I think of Mascanosa as the right-wing voice of some of the Cubans, but is it true also that there's a broader base of Cubans who speak with no voice at all?
Well, there sure is, but they don't have very much money, and so they don't have access to media, and they're not a lobbying voice that's heard. Quite a number of influential dissidents in Miami who, for fear of reprisal, keep their mouths shut, or for lack of access to media, are just not listened to. So when you talk about Jorge Mascanosa, you're talking about a man whose wealth is estimated to be in excess of $100 million. Well, that buys a lot of influence, votes, and access. And when many of the emigres are people who managed to come out of Castro's jail, come over here with absolutely nothing, well, certain people who already enjoy the prestige of being the spokesperson or the spokespeople of the emigres are not necessarily sanguine about the prospect of having to share the dais with these new arrivals. So they are pressured to stay quiet. And again, some of this is better read in the meticulous research. So I don't want to get into a great deal of name calling here, but there's any number of influential emigres and organizations that you just don't hear much about because they don't have the money, they don't have the clout, they don't have the influence.
What's life like today in Cuba? What do the recent...
Well, I think that the reason why Castro is doomed to fall, and probably sooner rather than later, probably before as many people said, well, he'll die and then and things will be different. I don't know if he's going to have the luxury of waiting till he dies to see all this fall apart around him. The infrastructure in Cuba is simply in a shambles ever since Russian aid was cut off. And with the end of Russian aid, the social service industry in Cuba, the living conditions, the living standards in Cuba have just deteriorated to a point where pretty soon you're going to have the kind of anarchy that we saw in Haiti. Things will just become untenable. There's an old joke that goes around down in Miami, if I can remember it. The three successes of Castro's revolution are education, sports, and medicine. And the three failures are breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And if that was true before, it is true in spades now.
Are we going to hear more of John Deal?
Well,
we've got Done Deal and Raw Deal.
And I've just turned in a third manuscript, a little different. I diverge from politics in this one, and it's a little more of a personal story. It has to do with an actress finding out in her 40s that she was adopted, and in the course of looking into that, comes to Florida, and suddenly her life's in danger, and Deal and Driscoll get involved. That's the story of...
So Driscoll's going to live again, too?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think he's pretty much indispensable. They're kind of yin and yang boys, Driscoll and Deal. I can't imagine Deal doing too much without him. And that's called One Shot Deal, or at least it is. That's what we're calling it now. And then there's a fourth book that I'm already now in the process of noodling about, and that book is due a year from now, and it will be published by Harper's in 1996. So there'll be at least 4 of these before it's all said and done, and I hope more.
What makes a teacher, professor, PhD write mysteries?
There's a long answer and a short answer, and the short answer is Ann Taylor.
Aha.
That's where my wife likes to shop.
Aha, I understand, yes.
So, the long answer is a little more complicated than that, but essentially, I had a long career writing short stories and poems and articles in magazines that had a circulation of about 6. It would be my wife, 4 friends, and the editor. And finally, I just got tired of that. And as I was saying before, I was reading some of the things going on in contemporary mystery and thriller fiction, and I said, there is no reason, and this was true from the time that Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler and others, Ross MacDonald, were writing. There's no reason why I can't take the form, the convention of this kind of a novel and allow myself the luxury of talking about issues and things that really matter and about how we live and get by in this world.
Well, we've run out of the luxury of time, but I do want to tell our viewers that I've enjoyed Raw Deal, and you will too. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.